Just when you thought it was safe to go back into the water, another film review. And of course, you know what it is: Jaws, the most famous tagline on any film poster, and one of the most iconic movies of all time. And the most amazing thing about Jaws is that it was created in a perfect storm, a perfect creative storm, because everything that could go wrong on this film set went wrong. And yet somehow events conspired to make this film a movie masterpiece. So let's cut to the story, because every film, of course, originates with an original story. And this was the birth child of Peter Benchley, who was a struggling novelist, down in his luck, no money to his name. Is there any other kind of writer? And sitting on the beach in California, bemoaning his fate, thinking, where did it go wrong? And he suddenly had this idea, looking out over the ocean: what happens if a man-eating shark terrorized an entire beachside community? And there the idea was birthed. He went back to his wife. She said, no, I think this is a terrible idea. Anyway, he persisted. And to cut a long story short, his novel became the #1 bestseller of that year. So, of course, Universal immediately snatched it up and said, we have to make this into a movie. And they had attached a director, but there was a young and up-and-coming director, Steven Spielberg. And they said to him, look, can you just read this and see if there's potential in it? And he read it, and he said, I think it would make a great movie. And they said, well, unfortunately, we have a director attached already. He said, no, well, if he falls out, I'd like to do it. And thank heavens he did. This original guy, whoever he was, apparently he was pitching his idea, opening scene, and then he said, and then the whale comes up. And they were like, what? No, it's a great white shark. Like, I mean, if you don't even know what the freaking animal is, you shouldn't be directing this film. And so they fired him and got Spielberg on board. So anyway, but then Spielberg now was ambivalent, because he'd been offered a movie called Lucky Lady, which had two the biggest stars of the 70s, Gene Hackman and Burt Reynolds. And so he wanted to do Lucky Lady. And Sid Sheinberg, who was his mentor, said, no, you must do Jaws. Because Lucky Lady might be a good movie, but it won't be commercial. But Jaws has the potential to be a massive commercial success. And he was right. And thank heaven Spielberg took his advice. So then he started looking at amending the script, because he felt it needed a bit of humor. And so he brought on Carl Gottlieb, just to kind of disarm the seriousness and the brutality of the story with those moments of humor that kind of give you a bit of relief in between the suspense. And the suggestions that Carl Gottlieb came up with were absolutely brilliant. And so Spielberg took him on, and Universal agreed to use him. But the problem was that they had to rush ahead with the story, because there was an impending SAG strike, and they wouldn't be able to get actors unless they cast people immediately. So Spielberg wanted to get Lee Marvin to play Quint, the grizzled shark hunter. But Lee Marvin, ironically, was off on a vacation fishing. And he said, no, why would I leave my vacation to do a film about a shark, which probably won't work? And I'm fishing anyway. So no, he turned it down. Thank heavens he did, because the producer said to Spielberg, look, we've just worked with this English actor, Robert Shaw. He's absolutely brilliant. Why don't you use him? And Spielberg cast Shaw, and what an inspired piece of casting. I'm going to talk about that a bit later. For the main protagonist, you had to have an everyman, somebody that everybody could relate to and like. Spielberg couldn't find the right person. He was at an industry party, really feeling down in the dumps, sitting in a couch, bemoaning his fate. And somebody came up to him and said, are you okay? You look like you're out of sorts. Can I help you? Ended up being Roy Schneider. And he didn't know who Spielberg was, because Spielberg was relatively unknown. So it wasn't like he was canvassing for the role. And Spielberg just poured his heart out to him and said, look, I can't find this role. This is the story. And Roy Schneider said to him, but I'm an actor. And he said, I know. I've seen French Connection. Would you be interested? And Schneider read the synopsis and said, I definitely would be. Ended up getting cast. Can't think of anyone else to play this role. He's absolutely fantastic. Richard Dreyfuss was always Spielberg's first choice, but he wasn't interested, because he had just done the apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, and he was convinced this film was going to make him a star, and he didn't see the potential in Jaws. Turns out Duddy Kravitz wasn't a huge success popularity-wise. So he came running back to Spielberg and said, please, I still want to do Jaws. So these three actors, the chemistry between them is incredible. Might never have happened with three other actors, and yet events conspired for these three guys to get cast. Absolutely amazing. So they started going ahead, shooting in Martha's Vineyard. Another thing that Spielberg insisted on, he said it has to be shot on the ocean. The studio said, "You're crazy. We can't control that environment. Rather shoot it on a water tank in a sound studio or on a lake, but not on the Atlantic Ocean." Spielberg wouldn't budge. He said, "It's got the right texture. We need the ocean to sell the story." So they begrudgingly agreed. I think they didn't realize what on earth they were heading in for. So the first month and a half was on the land. That was fine. Next thing, they go in the ocean. Everything goes wrong. The tides are pulling the barge that's got the shot lined up. So the sun is out of position. They need to wait for the tides to come back so that they can line up the shot properly. The wind's playing against them, the elements. But the biggest problem, and the weather, of course, days getting cancelled. But the biggest problem of all was the shark didn't work. Now, that's a slight problem. If your film is about a shark and the shark doesn't work, you've got a problem. I mean, the shark is your lead character. So this is a massive problem. Spielberg, like everything, the mechanics of the shark, the salt water in the ocean was corroding the electrical circuits. There was always a problem. They had to go back, re-weld this, re-weld that, attach this, the anchors. There was just every day there was a problem with the shark, whose ironically his name was Bruce, that Spielberg named the shark after his lawyer. Anyway, the rushes came back. They didn't look great. The studio wanted to shut the movie down. There was days being cancelled because of the shark not working, and they were going behind schedule, and Spielberg was panicking. He didn't know what to do. He went back to his log cabin on the island where they were filming, and he honestly thought, my career's over. And then he had this moment of inspiration. I need to tell the story without the shark. Like Hitchcock, creating suspense without showing the danger. The suspense of a bomb going off without seeing the bomb, without the bomb going off until the last minute. Telling the story without the shark. And this was key to the movie's success. And yet, ironically, this was not the original idea. If you look at Spielberg's storyboard, from the opening shot, the opening attack, the shark features throughout the movie. He had to ditch all of that out of the window and literally turn it the other way around and see the shark for maybe 1/8 of the movie. So it's implying the shark without showing the shark. And it was a stroke of genius, using the camera as the shark's POV, causing terror in the audience. It was all birthed out of the fact that the shark didn't work. And that turned out to be an incredible source of inspiration. So he had to re-storyboard everything, still behind schedule, still fighting the budget, still every day apparently the studio were threatening to fire him. The producers, Zanuck and Brown, had to fight to keep him on. Every night they were going back, making script changes. I mean, everything that you shouldn't do on a movie. And yet for this film, it worked. And there was a turning point in the shoot itself, where a scene where Robert Shaw's character Quint, after this wonderful scene of drunkenness on the ship where they're comparing scars, and then suddenly it gets serious, where he tells them the reason why he hates sharks. He was a surviving member of the Indianapolis, which was a World War II ship that went down. It was after delivering the bomb. It was coming back. And it's because it was a secret mission and it got torpedoed by a Japanese submarine. Nobody knew they were out there. So you had 1,200 men going into the water. And for 5 days, they had to survive. And the sharks came. And the way he described this scene is absolutely brilliant. It's one of the great scenes of all time. And even the way Spielberg shoots it. He brought on John Milius to write, I think it was 8 pages of dialogue. There's incredible monologue. Shaw actually cut it down to 4.5. But on the day of shooting, Shaw rocked up blind drunk. And he was a hard-drinking English actor. Everybody knew he had that reputation. Was part of his process. But for this scene, it was a disaster. He was so paralytically drunk, they had to carry him onto the ship. Couldn't get the dialogue out. At the end of the day, when he kind of half sobered up, he said to Spielberg, have I disgraced myself completely? And Spielberg was like very diplomatic and said, not completely. The next day, Shaw arrived, stone cold sober, hit this monologue out of the park. It's one of the best pieces of acting in film. Should have won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor on the basis of that scene alone. And the amazing thing is, in the final scene in the movie, they actually intercut that scene with scenes from, takes from when he was sober and takes when he was drunk the previous day, and you can't tell the difference. It's that good a performance. Anyway, they knew then that they had a film. Carried on shooting, but it was a long, very long, agonizing year before the film. It was, I think they went 157 days, where the original shooting schedule should have been 50. So 3 times the shooting schedule, twice the budget. The Universal were freaking out. Is this film going to make its money back? After the first screening and people started running to the bathroom, getting sick, Spielberg knew we had a hit. It was just this incredible combination of all the elements, the music, the cinematography, the acting, the script, to create the perfect storm of a movie. Absolutely phenomenal. John Williams' score won the BAFTA, won the Oscar, won the Golden Globe, won a Grammy. It's composed of 2 notes of music repeatedly used to create that. But it sounded one-dimensional, but the genius of it, the impending attack of the shark, the relentlessness of the score, the ominous nature of the score, the almost kind of increasing the audience's heartbeat, and many other elements that he brought into that score, even though those 2 notes drive the film. Spielberg has already admitted that 50% of the success of Jaws is to John Williams' score. It was a stroke of genius. There's something primal about it that just gets into the audience's psyche. It was a psychological film score, and it was brilliant. Almost reminds me of Bernard Herrmann's score in Psycho. It's the same kind of singular but absolutely highly effective. Bill Butler's cinematography used a black box to surround the camera so they could submerge it half in water and half above the water. And this always created the impression that, that it was the shark's POV, that it was going to strike at any moment, and seeing, people with their legs dangling and the camera half in, half out of the water created such an element of terror, of impending doom. It was absolute genius. The way Spielberg uses crowds, the way he choreographed crowds in this movie within the frame, absolutely brilliant. So many different directing techniques he used. Of course, the famous dolly zoom shot when in the Lilo scene, which in fact, of course, he stole from one of his inspirations. Again, I mentioned him already, Hitchcock. Hitchcock was the guy who originated the dolly zoom in Vertigo. But that whole build-up of that scene is absolutely incredible. You've got this kind of element of Brody looking out into the ocean. You cut to the ocean. You cut underneath with the shark coming up to the Lilo. Cut back to the shore. Brody sees something, looks over somebody's shoulder. He just created this tension, unnerving tension, just from shot selection and methodical, slow build-up of suspense. It is really, truly one of the great suspense, horror, adventure movies ever. And it rolls all those genres into one. So many great scenes. The opening scene where the woman being pulled, again, you don't see the shark, but just the movement of her body, the imagination runs riot. The Lilo scene, I mentioned that before. The last third of the movie, even the scene with the jetty being pulled. You don't see the shark, but the fact that the imagination going, a shark that could pull an entire jetty, and then the jetty turns around in the ocean at night and starts coming back. It just is absolute genius filmmaking. The last third of the movie, where the shark sort of turns the tables and it's man versus beast. There's so many elements, obviously taken from Moby Dick, but who cares? It's really everything conspiring to make this an absolutely brilliant movie,